when I received a desperate call from the Air National Guard asking if a massive C-17 transport could land on my grandfather's tiny dirt airstrip during a fierce storm, I thought they were crazy. I had no idea the pilot requesting my coordinates was the kid I'd taught to fly 20 years ago, or that this impossible landing would transform my failing farm into a strategic military facility. What happened next would change my life forever. Hi everyone, welcome to Life's Changing Stories. Now, let's dive into today's story. Ryan O'Malley was 64 years old and more stubborn than the Missouri mules his grandfather used to raise. Every morning, despite his creaking joints and the bank notices piling up on his kitchen table, he'd walk the perimeter of the small dirt airstrip his grandfather had carved out of their wheat fields back in 1943. 3,000 feet of packed earth and gravel, built during World War II when Patrick O'Malley had volunteered their farm for civilian air patrol duties, watching for enemy aircraft that never came. Ryan's father, Sean, had kept the strip operational through the Cold War, hosting training flights for local pilots and serving as an emergency landing site for crop dusters and small aircraft. But the strip hadn't turned a profit in decades. Modern aviation had moved on to bigger airports, with concrete runways and sophisticated equipment, leaving the O'Malley family airstrip as little more than a relic of a bygone era. Still, Ryan maintained it in perfect condition. Every pothole was filled, every rut smoothed, every blade of grass along the edges kept trimmed. Some things matter more than money, he'd mutter to himself as he worked, echoing his grandfather's philosophy. The strip represented 3 generations of O'Malley dedication to aviation and community service, and Ryan would be damned if he'd let it die on his watch. But keeping that promise was becoming increasingly difficult. Midwest Agricultural Corporation had been systematically buying up family farms throughout central Missouri, offering prices that seemed generous until you factored in the requirement to tear down anything that interfered with large-scale mechanized farming. The Henderson place had sold out last month, followed by the Miller farm just 2 weeks ago. Each time a neighbor sold, Ryan felt the walls closing in around his own 240-acre operation. The corporation had made him 3 offers, each more generous than the last, but each requiring the complete destruction of the airstrip to maximize planting acreage. Ryan had turned them all down, despite knowing he had maybe 6 months before the bank foreclosed on what remained of his grandfather's legacy. The storm that changed everything began building on a Tuesday evening in late October. Ryan was checking the weather radar on his ancient computer when his landline rang, a rarity in an age when most people had long since switched to cell phone. "Is this Ryan O'Malley?" The voice was crisp, military, with the unmistakable tone of authority. "Speaking." "Mr. O'Malley, this is Colonel Sarah Martinez with the Missouri Air National Guard. I understand you maintain a private airstrip on your property. Can you tell me its current condition and length?" Ryan frowned, wondering if this was some kind of prank. "It's 3,200 feet. Packed earth and gravel. What's this about?" "Sir, we have a situation developing. A C-17 Globemaster, carrying critical medical equipment, needs to reach Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. Both Lambert Airport and Scott Air Force Base are completely weathered in, and we're running out of options." Ryan nearly dropped the phone. "Colonel, with all due respect, a C-17 needs at least 6,000 feet of concrete runway. What I've got is a dirt strip that's barely suitable for crop dusters. The aircraft commander specifically requested your coordinates," Colonel Martinez continued. "Captain Michael Sullivan said you taught him to fly, and that if anyone could make this work, it would be you." The name hit Ryan like a physical blow. Michael Sullivan, the scrawny 15-year-old who'd shown up at his door 22 years ago, begging for flying lessons he couldn't afford. Ryan had seen something special in the kid's determination and had spent 2 summers teaching him everything about aviation in Ryan's old Cessna 150. When Michael aged out of the foster care system at 18, Ryan had written the recommendation letter that got him into the Air Force Academy. "Mike Sullivan?" Ryan whispered. "That skinny kid with the second-hand bicycle?" "Captain Sullivan is one of our most experienced C-17 pilots," Colonel Martinez said. "He says you made him the aviator he is today, and he trusts your strip more than any concrete runway in the state." Ryan stared out his kitchen window at the approaching storm, then at the neat rows of LED lights he'd installed along the runway edges years ago, a concession to modern safety that had cost him a month's grocery money. "Colonel, this is suicide in these conditions. If that medical equipment doesn't reach St. Louis by morning, we're going to lose patients who could have been saved," Martinez replied quietly. "Can you light the runway?" Ryan thought about the promise he'd made to Michael's dying foster mother, that he'd always be there if the boy needed help. "I'll light it," he said finally. "But you tell Mike that if he destroys my grandfather's runway, I'll never forgive him." Within an hour, the storm was in full fury. Rain lashed Ryan's truck as he hauled additional emergency lights from his barn, driving steel stakes into the muddy ground to mark the runway's exact boundaries. He positioned his pickup at the north end of the strip, headlights blazing to give the pilot additional reference points. His radio crackled to life. "Anderson's Strip. This is Thunder 67, requesting runway condition update." The voice was deeper, weathered by years of command, but unmistakably Michael's. "Thunder 67, this is Anderson Strip. Runway marked and clear. Surface wet but holding. Wind gusting southwest at about 30 knots. Copy that, Anderson. Coming in from the northeast." Thanks for the light show. Ryan positioned himself where he could see the approach path, straining his ears over the storm's fury. Then he heard it. The deep, distinctive roar of 4 massive Pratt & Whitney engines cutting through the wind and rain. The C-17 emerged from the storm like some prehistoric monster, impossibly large against the backdrop of Missouri farmland. "Too fast," Ryan whispered, watching the aircraft's approach. But even as he spoke, he saw the massive flaps extending fully, the aircraft's nose pitching up as Michael bled off airspeed with the precision of a surgeon. The main landing gear touched down exactly at the runway threshold, throwing up sheets of muddy water. Reverse thrusters engaged with a deafening roar that probably woke up half the county. The aircraft continued its controlled deceleration, nose wheel settling 3/4 of the way down the strip. With just over 200 feet of runway remaining, the C-17 came to a complete stop. Ryan sat frozen in his truck, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. By every law of physics and aviation, what had just happened should have been impossible. "Thunder 67 is down safely," Michael's voice came through the radio. "Thanks for the assist, Ryan. That was just like old times." "You almost gave me a heart attack, Mike," Ryan replied, his voice shaking. "That was the craziest damn thing I've ever seen." "Learned from the best, didn't I?" Ryan drove to the aircraft, his pickup looking like a toy beside the massive transport. The rear loading ramp lowered, revealing Air Force personnel in flight suits and a cargo bay packed with sophisticated medical equipment. Michael appeared at the top of the ramp, no longer the skinny teenager Ryan remembered, but a broad-shouldered Air Force captain with command presence and graying temples. "Ryan O'Malley," Michael said, walking down the ramp with a grin. "You haven't aged a day." They shook hands as emergency medical equipment began rolling off the aircraft. Advanced life support machines, surgical equipment, medications that would save lives if they reached St. Louis in time. Ryan helped the crew transfer everything to his barn, which had become an impromptu staging area. "We'll be grounded until this weather breaks," Michael explained as they worked. And until I figure out how to get this bird off your short runway without decorating your wheat field with airplane parts. By midnight, everything was secured in the barn and the storm was beginning to ease. Air Force personnel gathered in Ryan's kitchen for hot coffee and shelter from the rain, their presence transforming his lonely farmhouse into a bustling command center. As the hours passed, Ryan and Michael caught up on 20 years of life. Michael had graduated from the academy, served multiple combat deployments, and worked his way up to aircraft commander on the Air Force's largest transport. But he'd never forgotten the old farmer who'd given a foster kid hope and wings. Not many people would have given flying lessons to a 16-year-old with no money, Michael said quietly, or written a recommendation letter for a kid from nowhere. Ryan glanced around his kitchen, noting how much smaller the farm seemed than it had in Michael's youth. Had to sell the east section last year, he admitted. Corporate outfits are buying everything, and I can't compete with their operation. Michael's expression grew serious. How bad is it? Got about 6 months before the bank takes the rest, Ryan said with forced lightness. Can't compete with their equipment, their efficiency. They want to tear down the strip, maximize the planting area. But you kept the runway perfect, Michael observed. Grandfather would haunt me if I let it go. At dawn, the storm cleared to reveal a crystalline autumn morning. Michael completed his pre-flight inspection while Ryan watched nervously. Taking off would be even more challenging than landing. The C-17 would need every inch of runway to get airborne with enough fuel to reach Scott Air Force Base. It's going to be tight, Michael admitted. I'll need to extend the runway by flattening about an acre of your crop beyond the drainage ditch. Extra safety margin. Ryan stared at the wheat field in question. In a good year, that acre might cover a mortgage payment, but he was going to lose the farm anyway, and Michael needed that margin to get his crew home safely. Do what you need to do, Ryan said. Within an hour, Air Force ground personnel arrived with earth-moving equipment, filling in the drainage ditch and flattening the field to create a makeshift runway extension. Word of the unprecedented operation spread through the rural community, and vehicles began lining the country roads as neighbors, local pilots, and curious onlookers gathered to witness history. Even the banker who held Ryan's mortgage showed up, his expression unreadable as he watched military engineers transform a struggling farm into an impromptu airbase. As Michael climbed into the cockpit, Colonel Martinez appeared beside Ryan. Captain Sullivan specifically requested this mission, she said quietly. Called it paying an old debt. The C-17's engines spooled up with a roar that rattled windows for miles. The aircraft began to move, accelerating down the original runway and onto the newly flattened extension. Ryan held his breath as the massive plane used every inch of available space, nose lifting just at the very end of the extended runway, main wheels following seconds later. A cheer went up from the crowd as the C-17 climbed into the clear morning sky. People approached Ryan, clapping him on the back and shaking his hand, expressing awe at what they'd witnessed. 3 days later, Ryan was repairing fence posts when a convoy of black SUVs rolled up his driveway. General Patricia Wells, Air Mobility Command, stepped out with a bearing that spoke of decades of military service. Mr. O'Malley, I've reviewed Captain Sullivan's emergency landing report, she said without preamble. Our analysts have identified a significant gap in our emergency landing capabilities in this region. Your operation demonstrated your strip's strategic value even for our largest aircraft. General Wells explained that the Air Force wanted to designate O'Malley Field as an official auxiliary landing facility. The arrangement would involve surface upgrades, proper lighting installation, and a maintenance agreement. Most importantly, it came with a substantial facility management fee and land lease that would resolve Ryan's financial concerns permanently. Your property remains yours, she emphasized. We're leasing only the runway and immediate surrounding area. This designation would also prevent Midwest Agricultural from ever acquiring the rest of your farm. 3 months later, Air Force engineers completed surface upgrades, reinforcing the dirt strip with a polymer composite that could handle everything from fighter jets to heavy transports. The financial arrangement saved Ryan's farm, cancelled foreclosure proceedings, and allowed him to buy back the eastern section he'd previously sold. Michael Sullivan performed the first official landing on the newly designated O'Malley Auxiliary Landing Facility, accompanied by General Wells and a delegation of Air Force officials. The ceremony was small but meaningful, with neighbors, local pilots, and military personnel gathering to celebrate the transformation of a struggling farm into a strategic military asset. "Your facility is exactly what we needed in this region," General Wells told Ryan. "You've started something of a movement. We're now identifying other strategic private airfields that could be incorporated into our emergency network." Ryan nodded, thinking of his grandfather's belief that private citizens had a role to play in national readiness. The old strip hadn't just been preserved, it had found new purpose while honoring its origins. Michael pulled Ryan aside after the ceremony. "You showed me that loyalty matters, that keeping your word matters," he said quietly. "When I heard about the emergency, I knew if anyone could make the impossible work, it would be you." As Ryan watched military aircraft use his grandfather's runway alongside civilian pilots who'd heard about the facility, he understood that some traditions seem impractical until their true value is revealed. His stubborn dedication to an outdated airstrip hadn't just saved his land. It had proven that sometimes the old ways still have something vital to offer the modern world. The bank manager who'd once threatened foreclosure now proudly displayed photos of the historic landing in his office. Midwest Agricultural had quietly withdrawn their purchase offers and focused their expansion efforts elsewhere. And every morning, Ryan still walked the perimeter of his airstrip, now maintaining it not just for family tradition, but for national security. General Wells had been right about one thing: some landings seem impossible until someone has the courage to attempt them. And sometimes, the faith of one old farmer in a kid with big dreams creates ripples that last for generations, transforming both a struggling farm and a military career into something far greater than the sum of their parts. We hope you enjoyed today's story of love, life, and betrayal. For more free stories and entertainment from our channel, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe with notifications.